Because that's the only way to be, is you got to love it. You could hate it. I could have hated that my dad was a drunk, but I loved that he was a drunk. Like, you got to love unconditionally. Because it's like if I'm not loving it, it's like I'm hating myself. I remember this walk that I had with my sister when I was about 6. It was in the summertime, it was on the lake shore, and we were walking from my grandparents down to Heidel House. And it was odd, because we were walking with my dad, and my dad didn't do a whole lot of stuff with us, just kind of like that. Going for a walk would have been kind of unusual. And he told us that he had cancer, and that he was gonna fight it, and that he was gonna make it. And I just kind of assumed that was going to be how it would go. What I didn't know is that nobody thought he would live. He had about a 5% chance of living through it. And at the end of the day, he made it. And so for me, I just kind of assumed that of course he made it, right? Like, what else would there be? And so when I look back on it, I just consider how incredibly lucky I was. But what if I wouldn't have been lucky? What if I wouldn't have known him? What if he would have died? And then, like, what if I would have just had the little memories that I had of him at 6 years old? I wouldn't have known him at all. And knowing him has been such a big part of my life. On so many levels, like, I could have been so bitter about how we grew up, because he wasn't there. He really wasn't there until we were well into our teens, and then then it was pretty sporadic. And for some reason, I always loved him, and maybe it was because he was just such an amazing man, and so, like, the time that I had with him worked, and it was all good. But there was so much time that wasn't good. His ability to relate with us as kids was just horrible. But somehow, as we grew up, we were so close together. And he was always happy. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to have a greater understanding, and maybe, what he went through was so that I could have an understanding of his troubles and his faults. I'm Irish, and there's a certain amount of culture that you kind of are proud of, right? And so it's like, my nickname's Paddy, P-A-D-D-Y, right? I mean, that's about as you expect me to belly up and have a Guinness, and so, like, there's kind of an expectation there. And there's a piece of that I really embrace and I love, right? And then there's also a piece of it where I look at my dad and I realize, like, he went through life without an understanding of what the role of alcohol. I drink too much, I eat too much. Like, I know that stuff. I try to keep it in balance, but I know it, you know what I mean? And there's all sorts of other stuff that I struggle with. I didn't say, well, I'm not going to be a drunk, right? But what I did say is, I'm going to be aware. I'm going to have a self-awareness. Because I looked at my dad and just saw how beautiful he was. And I thought about maybe all of the things that he might have done had he had an awareness, And maybe that's what the biggest gift that he gave to me was that kind of quest for wanting to be aware and wanting to really understand and to be able to step back and take a look at what and really who I am. And so I think about Alex and Donnie, and I think, God, I want them to know me for like my faults as well as my strengths. And so that they can learn from that, and and not, hopefully, and maybe they'll fight it, every kid fights it a bit, but hopefully embrace it instead of fighting it. We're so connected on a family level that we are each other. When I'm looking at this idea of really being integrated and part of this lineage of people, of my dad and my grandpa, and I'm sure of people, far beyond that if I would know who they are. And by really embracing that, all aspects of who they are, and understanding that that's inside of me, and then saying, okay, so now I understand that that's all who I am, and I love it, Because that's the only way to be, is you gotta love it. You could hate it. I could have hated that my dad was a drunk, but I loved that he was a drunk. Like, you gotta love unconditionally. Because it's like if I'm not loving it, it's like I'm hating myself. Because I know that's part of me. That's who I am. And so like when I come to terms of being able to just love him, absolutely and unconditionally, right? Without expecting him to change. I never thought he would change. We tried at one point, but it failed miserably, And so like the idea of just accepting him for exactly who he was. And then that allows me to say, yeah, I can accept myself exactly who I am. And love it, and love myself for the faults and strengths as well. Something magical happens where all of a sudden I can, I'm not fighting it. And when I'm not fighting it and when I'm embracing it, life just seems to happen so beautifully. And when I'm loving myself, I have so much more space to like love those around me. And it's amazing what comes of it.